Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm really excited today because I'm joined by Dr. Kirsten Vandenheuvel, which I actually should have asked how to pronounce your name, so I hope I did that correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Kirsten is a naturopathic doctor who helps high-achieving women reclaim their energy, restore their health, and break free from burnout through sustainable root cause wellness strategies. She works with women navigating weight gain, perimenopause, menopause, anxiety, and chronic fatigue, helping them feel like themselves again without adding one more thing to an already overwhelming to-do list. Today, we're exploring why so many high-achieving women find themselves running on empty, what chronic stress actually does to the body, and how nervous system regulation can become one of the most powerful foundations for lasting healing. So you can see why Dr. Kirsten was a great fit for our audience here. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
No, you said it perfectly, which honestly most people don't get. So kudos to you.
So I would love to, I'm definitely going to ask you about how you found naturopathic medicine because I've been asking every guest that, but I would love to just start with what you mean by when you say healing doesn't have to become another thing to perfect. I think you've created a really wonderful ecosystem for your patients from what I've seen that you've shared on social media and your own podcast. So just give me a little idea of what that means to you when you're speaking with patients.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I noticed when I started seeing patients is that they felt this pressure to do everything perfectly. You know, like movement had to be done as perfectly as possible. So spending, hours in the gym or physically going to the gym, even if they hated that, or eating had to be done perfectly. Like they had to spend hours meal prepping, or every single night they had to whip up a healthy meal after dinner or after work. And honestly, being a high achiever myself and being a busy person myself, I noticed these patterns within myself too and had my own experiences. And I realized that true health, yes, there's obviously ideal where we do things the most ideal way. We eat healthy consistently. We move our body consistently. However, real life isn't always perfect and predictable. And so I felt like true wellness had to be somewhere in the middle, the messy middle of, yes, we do want to do these ideal things. We want to be consistent with our eating and our exercise and our stress support, but in a way that is sustainable. And that is what's really, really important to me, especially again, coming from a background of, being a busy high achiever where I was, in medical school and trying to work and do all these things. I just realized how unsustainable that lifestyle was when things actually get busy. And so it made me realize that I had to change something for myself, and I wanted to help my patients do the same too.
Yeah, we always learn lessons ourselves and then apply them to patients, right? Or I do anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit of your journey. So I've asked every ND who I've had on as a guest, and there's always a really unique story attached to how they found naturopathic medicine and what it means to them. So share with our listeners how you found it.
Okay, so mine is probably unique as well. I was in my last year of my undergrad. I did kinesiology, and I had always been interested in the body and health and wellness. But I had no idea what naturopathic medicine was. And at the time when I went into kinesiology, I went into it because I had these values and I liked, moving my body, going to the gym. But as I got to the end of the program, I realized it really was mostly a stepping stone. Most people don't come out as kinesiologists. Some people do. Um, but I knew there had to be something else. And something like physiotherapy and chiropractics for me just didn't sit right. I didn't feel aligned. I felt like I needed more variety in my day to day. And so I had been thinking for months, what am I going to do next? I was volunteering at a yoga studio, just to get some free yoga and to be out in the community. And someone that I did my shift with, you would usually do it with somebody else, had just graduated from the program in Toronto. And so she had just become a naturopathic doctor. And so every week I would ask her questions. I was so intrigued. I'm like, I've never heard of this. What the heck is naturopathic medicine? And so we had conversations, and the more she told me about it, the more I realized, hey, this is something that feels super aligned with my values, how I foresee health and wellness. And I just didn't know it existed. And so I decided to go shadow of her to see what it was like from that end of seeing patients. And then I also went to go see a naturopathic doctor myself because, like most naturopathic doctors, I had my own health issues, things that were mostly digestive related that nobody really had answers for me for the longest time. I tried to figure it out on my own and I really couldn't. So it wasn't until I saw this naturopathic doctor that I realized, oh, okay, there is like a completely different approach to health and wellness. I walked into her office. She offered me a cup of tea. Like that felt like such a different experience as somebody who has a lot of like healthcare anxiety and walking into the typical sterile doctor's office, medical facility, whatever it might be. And I just knew it just like felt so comforting and so aligned. And so I started to look into the program. And it felt very daunting because it is obviously a very big commitment. And even when I told my family about it, everyone was like, wait, what the heck are you going to do? But everybody warmed up to it. And I decided to go for it. And here I am. So ended up working out really well. I honestly went in pretty blindly. Like it was 9 months after I applied for the program that I was actually starting or had heard about naturopathic medicine and I was starting the program. So it was a very quick turnover. But I'm so glad that I did it.
That's amazing. Similar story to where I didn't know about it. I was really struggling with going into conventional medical school, and I was working as a medical assistant for a surgeon, and the audiologist in that office introduced me to naturopathic medicine. And I was living near a school, the University of Bridgeport, and I immediately applied when I learned about it. I just knew, like, that's what I've been looking for. That's the type of medicine that I wanted to practice, and I didn't even know it existed. And I was having such a struggle with this idea of like going through the conventional paradigm. And that surgeon, I still send patients to his practice when they need surgery, and we've worked through the therapeutic order. But I remember he was like, why don't you just go to medical school and then learn integrative medicine? And I didn't know what I know now, but I'm so glad that I had the philosophical training and obviously the 4 years of nutrition and herbalism and homeopathy and learning the natural tools, which you just don't get if you go the conventional route. So I love hearing that story. And of course you work on nervous system states because you're a yogi and you were drawn to that initially as well. So that's awesome. And I think you made a really good point about the tea too. So obviously the nervous system creates the conditions for healing. And so I had a patient yesterday where I offered her tea. Most of the time I have time to like make a little tea between patients. And she was just, taken aback, like, oh my gosh, that's so nice. And that's so comforting and soothing. And, they walk in and they see the plants and the water and the environment we're in can help create that safety and that healing state for patients. So it's such a good point you make that you felt that immediately. I love that. And how were you outside of being a high achiever yourself? Was there a reason you felt drawn to working with women or working with women maybe that might resonate with burnout or overwhelm? Tell me a little bit about how you first started working with this population of healthcare.
It definitely wasn't what I originally thought I would be drawn to. That really didn't even come until after I had graduated and started practicing. I knew in myself somewhat that I was a high achiever, but I don't think I knew in depth what that actually meant for how that means how I show up in the world, how I show up in my work. And over time, it just became very evident to me that it definitely impacted how I went about life. And I think that just made me realize, especially seeing patients with very similar traits, that there had to be different ways to approach health and wellness when it came to all the foundations. Because for high achievers specifically, especially busy women who are, in the workforce, maybe working 9 to 5 or have like really high up jobs, whether it's C-suite or something, they don't necessarily have the time to, go to the gym again for 2 hours or meal prep all the time, especially if they're moms taking care of family members. Women just generally tend to be more caregivers, and they're putting everybody else before themselves. And so I saw that was a challenge and saw that within myself. And I didn't even really realize that I had made those shifts within myself until I started to reflect deeper when I was in medical school. When I was in university, actually, I mean, working out and like health and wellness, like I was very much a studious student, but at the same time, I spent a lot of time at the gym and just thinking about my health because I just did have more time. 5 classes a semester compared to 12 classes a semester is very, very different. And so I lived a very specific lifestyle through high school and university when it came to my wellness. And then I got to medical school, and that's when everything shifted for me. I was incredibly flooded with all these classes, all these really hardcore classes, to be honest. There was so much information coming at me. So energetically and time-wise, it just was not the same. And so I had a really hard time because as soon as I got busy, I noticed that my wellness routine completely fell off because I was so used to having that hour and a half, 2 hours to spend going to a physical gym. And I wasn't able to do that. So I just completely stopped essentially. And then my mental health really took a turn. I was very anxious, very depressed in my first year. I had moved to a city that I knew nobody in. And I was in this incredibly difficult program where I felt like the stupidest person in the room, honestly. And so with that, it made me realize I had to make somewhat of a change. And after getting kind of used to, all the changes and getting the support that I needed, I then learned how to implement routines that worked for me. And so that looked like workouts don't have to be insanely long. Can they just be 20 minutes, and can they just be from home if that's all you can do today? And so that's where I found that within myself. And same with meal prep. Are there times, okay, do I know Wednesdays are my really slow days? So can I use like 2 hours in that day to meal prep for 4 or 5 days of the week that will help me feel good in my body and taken care of, rather than spending an hour or two after work or school or whatever it is, trying to do it every single day. And that helps me to eat healthier because I know I feel better when I eat healthier in a certain way. I just didn't know how to navigate that with my busy schedule. And so then when I started to see that more in practice, it was a big aha moment where I was like, oh, like other people are experiencing this too. And that was something that I actually did for myself that I can help these women apply in their day-to-day lives. And I just realized I really love working with women and women's health, just being a woman myself and having certain experiences in the healthcare system, being brushed aside with certain symptoms, conditions. I know what that feels like. So that's where that women's health aspect was really inspiring to me. I felt called to support women in that area, and also the advocation side, knowing what it's like to be on the side of the patient, but also having the information that I do as a doctor, I'm able to kind of navigate that system a little bit differently.
Totally. I think after years of being in practice, I don't think I realized it either when I first graduated, but when you have women coming into your office and you're told, that they were told, oh, your labs are fine, or they're just handed a medication or dismissed, or you're just aging, or, whatever the phrase is that they were given it. You hear it over and over and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a really big deal that women aren't getting answers or being listened to or, being helped to navigate the root causes of their health concern. So, yeah, I can definitely resonate with like the reality sets in that like you need to help more women. Yeah, I get
Yes,
that for sure.
absolutely.
I really love that you were able to see maybe patterns of perfectionism or high achieving, or maybe you were like, go, go, go. And you
Mhm.
probably started to realize that movement maybe was how you kind of moved fight or flight through your system. And then when you're sitting, all of a sudden, some of that becomes physiologically built up. And then, as you said, you started to maybe get more anxiety or see it in other
Mhm.
parts of your body. And so you lived it, and then you realize like, okay, how do I have practical tips and tricks and tools to still maintain health when we are high achieving or we are busy or there's a lot going on in our life? So you're able to
Mhm.
make all those connections. That's awesome. Can
Thank
you
you.
tell me a little bit about how you look at, let's just say, like burnout physiologically, or maybe some of the physiological responses that you might see or find on labs or hear from a patient when they're coming in and maybe they haven't prioritized their health or their nervous system and they're just kind of new to this all? What are some things, some patterns that you might notice?
Yeah. So the first thing I typically notice in these women is they're coming into my office because they have tried a lot of things themselves
Mm.
and they've been working a certain way for many years, maybe like through their 20s and even into their 30s, they were able to navigate life a certain way. And then maybe they get into their late 30s and into their 40s, and everything starts to kind of shift and change. And this is probably when we're starting to maybe see some changes in hormones with perimenopause, which a lot of women are not educated on how early that shift can start.
Totally.
And so that can totally impact so many different areas of your health. But I see often the typical woman that I see come in is she's lived a very busy life. She's been able to maintain this for a certain amount of time. And then all of a sudden, it seems like the past couple of years, things really have shifted, even though maybe their diet and their lifestyle hasn't shifted. Everything else seems to change. And I see a lot of, I'm starting to notice more weight gain, maybe around the abdomen. I'm feeling exhausted all the time. I'm not sleeping well. Maybe they're experiencing pain. It's kind of a host of all different symptoms. It's usually not just one thing. And almost every single patient who comes into my office is getting blood work done, because I find blood work so, so helpful to have a deeper understanding of what's happening in someone's specific body, because we can take a guess based off of symptoms, but of course blood work is going to give us so much more information. And so I use my second visit with patients almost entirely to review their blood work in so much depth. Like I nerd out about blood work because I just see how valuable it is, one, for understanding, what could be the cause of these symptoms, also knowing what their levels are. So if they're deficient in certain nutrients, for instance, what is that deficiency? How low are they? And if we're going to start them on supplements or something like that, are those supplements going to work? So using those as data points. And I also just find that blood work is really great, like physical value set that patients can actually look at and understand, oh, like this is what's happening in my body, because people
Yeah.
know they're experiencing certain things, but until they see it in front of them, I think sometimes that is actually super helpful, and seeing that change over time, the trends over time. So I really like to take a lot of time to do that. Oftentimes, a big piece that I'm looking at is blood sugar. I see blood
Yeah.
sugar is one of the biggest shifts, especially again, starting into the late 30s, early 40s,
Hmm.
but even in really young people in their 20s, just because of the lifestyle we live, the food that we have accessible to us, and also the lack of education that we're given. We talk a lot about diabetes, which is super important, but how do we prevent that years down the road? Because diabetes is typically happening decades after we've had so many different shifts in our blood sugar and dealing with insulin resistance specifically.
Yep.
And I don't know about where you are, but in Ontario specifically, or just maybe even in Canada, it's not very common for medical doctors to test like fasting insulin, for instance.
Same.
Okay,
Yeah.
same thing. So that is like a really important test that I think we're missing out. And so that fasting glucose, HbA1c, and fasting insulin are all tests that I do in almost every patient. If I'm lucky, I will do a 2-hour insulin glucose tolerance test. So testing their blood sugar over a 2-hour period. You get 4 different blood tests. So one fasting, then you're given a really super yummy pure glucose drink. It's typically done in pregnancy, but
In
only
pregnancy. Yeah.
testing glucose, not insulin. Then you test it 30 minutes after that drink, 1 hour, and then 2 hour. And that gives us a bunch of data points because fasting is helpful, but we're not fasting all the time. So how are you responding to food? Of course, these levels are going to increase. That's normal. Glucose, our blood sugar is going to spike when we have pure glucose, of course. And insulin, the hormone that regulates glucose, is also going to spike, of course. But we have certain points at each hour that we want to see them not go over, essentially, or stay under. And a lot of times what I'm seeing is glucose looks fine. Or maybe when we look over a long period of time, we do see some increases in glucose when we're looking at that 2-hour data point set. But insulin, we're seeing insulin go extremely high. And that's telling me that we're seeing more insulin resistance. So we need more insulin, that hormone that regulates glucose over time, because it's doing the most to regulate glucose for as long as it can. That's its job. That's then going to require more and more insulin until insulin can no longer do what it needs to do. And then glucose is going to start to change. And then we might move into, pre-diabetes, diabetes, which is then treated after some damage may already have been done to our cells, to our body, and harder to recover from. Definitely lifestyle changes do make a huge difference. But if we can get it at the point of insulin resistance or before, that is the best.
It's true prevention.
It's true prevention. So that's one of my favorite tests. I see a lot of people, especially these women, again, late 30s, early 40s, into their 50s, insulin resistance. And so that's why we're starting to see big changes to that abdominal weight gain. People often come into my office and they talk about it being related to cortisol, which technically, yes, is. But we want to kind of see how that is like a feedback loop. I do think that cortisol plays a big part in a lot of things, but there's just so much more than just, typical cortisol, where we're seeing so many people talk about this online, like cortisol belly. This is your cortisol X, Y, and Z. Yes, but there's a lot more nuance to that, I think. So I think it's important to have that conversation. So there's kind of this feedback loop of, we're having some insulin resistance, which is causing a lot of big ups and downs with their blood sugar, essentially. So common themes that I'm seeing in these women in this population, especially, is skipping meals, underfueling, which are huge causes of insulin resistance as well.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's this thought of eating less, skipping meals. That's going to help me, to be in a calorie deficit and to lose weight. But it's actually feeding more into this insulin resistance. And we're actually holding on to fat because the body is in a protective mode. We're not getting enough calories to even then think about going into a calorie deficit if necessary to lose weight. And so then we're actually storing more fat. I've also seen lack of strength training. So a common theme that I see is these women come in and they're doing all the right things. So they move their body, they're eating well. They're not necessarily eating takeout every single day, but their movement looks like maybe F45 or Orange Theory or one of these like
high intensity
HIIT training classes, which HIIT training is not necessarily inherently bad. Yes. It's okay, but when we're doing this every single day, one, we're not really getting enough progressive overload with strength training where we can actually lift heavier and heavier over time, because we're in the state of just having to get through this really intense class. We're not allowing our body to actually take some breaks because it's a very short period of time of high intensity training. Or they're doing, maybe weighted Pilates 6-7 days a week. So again, we're not getting enough of that progressive overload that you can get with very specific strength training days where you're only focusing on that. And the reason that that's important is because, well, for many reasons, but when you're thinking about things like insulin resistance, for instance, when we have more muscle, insulin is going to then bring glucose there to be used for energy rather than being stored on the liver or as fat around the abdomen, because we need to use that energy when we're producing more muscle. But also, going into perimenopause and menopause, when estrogen starts to decline, we're losing more muscle mass, we're losing more bone density, cardiovascular health. All of that is so important. And that's where strength training can be extremely helpful. Of course, cardiovascular training is helpful too. We need a mix, but you should be doing 2 to 3 days of specific strength training. And that can make a huge difference when it comes to the energy piece, because we're regulating our blood sugar at the same time. The insulin resistance is reducing. And it also just helps us to overall feel better mentally and physically, I think. So those are some big patterns alongside very typical nutrient deficiencies, because if we're not fueling properly, we probably are likely to be, iron deficient, vitamin D deficient, maybe B12 deficient, and other pieces. We of course look at like the thyroid and make sure all those pieces are ruled out before just considering the lifestyle aspects. But regardless of your diagnosis or your blood work, the foundations, sleep, exercise, diet, and stress support are always going to be a part of the treatment plan for me specifically. And I'm sure probably every naturopathic doctor, because it is just a huge part of every single condition and every single piece. And so I see these women having, extremely low energy levels. And it's kind of like this feedback loop of not sleeping well enough because their brain is waking them up at 3 a.m. to think about their to-do list, or they can't fall asleep because they're thinking about their to-do list.
Yeah.
They're always on. Their nervous system does not feel safe to slow down and stop, because that's all that they know is to be go, go, go. That feels safer. And so you don't sleep well, we're feeling tired. When we are more stressed in general, or we don't sleep well, then of course our cortisol is going to be off balance, which then can lead to those changes of insulin resistance and blood sugar and all of that great fun things that we just spoke about. And so I think the main point is that the lifestyle is just so important, and that the energy is usually not just one thing, but there's a lot of different things that we can do to regulate the body and bring it to a state of balance and safety, to increase energy, to reduce the weight gain, to make them just feel more energized and focused and ready to take on the day, to perform at the level that they're used to performing. So again, it's really not one thing, and it's not that, they're doing things wrong, but there are things that we can do that are small, tiny changes that maybe seem insignificant that can really make a big change.
Yeah, I love that. I also do a very in-depth second visit where we call it the review of findings. And
Mm-hmm.
I love labs for the same reason, that it puts everything into context. It gives me a really good idea of where we need to go first. And especially in high achieving women who maybe come into the office, I'm thinking of one patient in particular, and she kind of described her daily life and lifestyle. And she was like, but I love my life. Like, I don't want to stop any of that. Right. And so a lab really helped me to say, okay, well, let's optimize the health of your terrain. I understand that maybe you don't want to give up some of these kind of go, go, go aspects of life, and you really do survive well in these high stress states. But let's look at your labs and let's really like get your system on board with what we're doing. And let's also understand maybe some of the drains on the system or some deficiencies, as you said, or understand our circadian rhythm and our cortisol and our blood sugar. And then we kind of circle back, especially if, say, I've done their intake and maybe I know they have a trauma history or, chronic stress history. And then I can look at things like pregnenolone, and I can talk to them about the impacts of long-term stress and how that over time is going to affect their system. And you can't really sustain everything for the rest of your life if we're not focused on some of these root causes. And so it just allows for a really honest conversation that is grounded in data, grounded in unique labs for them, and then figuring out, given their life and their lifestyle and their goals and their values, how do we make this work? How do we make some changes sustainable? I'm also wondering, so you talk a lot about nervous system regulation with patients. Like, how do you explain that to patients? Because sometimes patients think that means just, going to yoga or breathing or being calm. How do you explain what it really means to you as a physician?
Yeah, I think especially again in this population that is very go, go, go. And I have very similar experiences with patients who struggle with the thought of like slowing down or making changes, not realizing that it's actually a strategy to make these changes for their performance, if they made these changes, made a couple of, slots in their week to add these strategies in, they actually would end up performing better and for longer. But it is a really hard
Yes.
pill to swallow, I think, unfortunately. And I get it because slowing down feels scary and it's all they know. And when you're, at the peak of your career and you're worried about what that could mean, for your job or whatever it might be, or you have really important clients and meetings, I get it. But it definitely is a strategy. And the nervous system plays a really big role because for these women specifically, they're essentially in a constant state of fight or flight. And a lot of them will tell me, well, I don't feel stressed necessarily. And that's a super common thing that I hear. And how I explain it to them is you might not feel like, there are moments in life where you feel extreme stress, you feel like your heart rate increasing, you feel yourself getting all worked up. You might not feel that way, but when your body is just in a state of chronic stress or state of fight or flight at all times, I mean, that's your normal, first of all. So you don't even know how to recognize what your baseline actually is, because that essentially is your baseline. And that's where they feel safe living, because again, that's the state that they've known. It comes from, perfectionistic tendencies, all or nothing tendencies, where there's this sense of unsafety in slowing down or disappointing people or not performing at their best. Or if they don't do everything 100%, then again, doing it 0% is better than in the messy middle, because it feels like you're not even doing anything worthwhile at that point.
Yeah, that all or nothing thinking is a big deal, right?
Huge. And I think a lot of people maybe don't even realize that they're living that way. It's this mindset that everything has to be done so perfectly. And if it can't, then there is no point. We're pushing it to the side, which then things like, again, exercise and, healthy eating, if you can't, live in that like 50% area instead of, 100, you also kind of feel like a failure to an extent. So then it's just this constant, again, negative feedback loop, essentially, where you're just feeling disappointed in yourself, angry if you don't do the thing. But then, maybe you'll go 2 weeks with this really, really perfect routine. And that's, maybe around New Year's or something like that. And it's working great and everything's amazing. And then all of a sudden it's not sustainable anymore. And again, you're back in the same cycle. So it's about creating safety around being able to live in the messy middle and being okay. So there's a huge mindset piece to this, but being in that constant state of fight or flight, it's going to make your body struggle with things like sleep and having that energy. And over time, our body can only sustain high cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine for so long, to the point where that's going to shut off. And you might then live in a state of burnout where you're feeling chronically exhausted. It's really hard to push yourself to do things, but you do, especially because these women are high functioning. So they're really good at basically masking all of their issues. They look fine on the outside. Nobody at work would ever really know. And then they go home and they crash and they, they can't get the exercise in. Maybe they're on the couch, scrolling on their phone because it's, again, a sense of a source of dopamine or coping mechanism of some sort. Or maybe they're doing the things, but they're really dragging their feet and they're noticing they're more irritable. Maybe they're snappy towards loved ones. They don't want to be and they feel bad about it, but they're living in this state of dysregulation at all times. And so for these women, it's really important that they take moments in the day, because again, sitting, maybe for 30, 40 minutes, what people envision, nervous system regulation to be, meditating for that long or something like that. I mean, could be great, but one, is not very realistic and they're probably not going to stick to it. And two, when you're in this constant state of dysregulation, can we find moments even throughout the day? So can we do this before you walk into a meeting to ground yourself, to regulate yourself? Can you take, again, a moment to go for a 5-minute walk without headphones, just allowing yourself to exist in your body and your thoughts, to just ground and not be doing, to let your body come back down to that baseline. So we're not just constantly pushing and pushing and pushing. There has to be kind of this, okay, yes, moments of acute stress, but then we can re-regulate, come back down. That's okay, right? Being stressed inherently is not necessarily bad. It is a survival mechanism for many different situations and can also be a form of good stress. Again, when we're doing things like exams, meetings, whatever it might be, where you need to be more on and ready to go and whatever that looks like for you. But then we still need those moments to come back down and re-regulate. And I also like to say before bed too, because this is again where these women are really struggling with their mind. Go, go, go. So I say you either need to have like a breathwork practice. Breathwork is great, especially for busy minds. It's a little bit different than meditation because you have to listen to the cues rather than just sit in, silence in your thoughts, which can be really hard for these women. You actually have to listen to cues and change your breath and really think about these things. So you might not be able to be in your head as much. You might be able to be in your body a bit more, which is so, so important. And if that doesn't work for them, I also say journaling. So mind dumping is what I like to call it. Just tossing every single thought in your brain, whether it's a to-do list or just anything that you're thinking. It does not have to be cohesive, on a piece of paper. Give yourself a timer, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you need. Write every single thing down. There is research to show that physically writing things down on a piece of paper, not just in your phone, can actually help your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, feel safer and more regulated, like you've dealt with, whatever feels like, again, a threat, because our body, our mind, our nervous system cannot differentiate between a tiger, a bear sitting in front of you, and your to-do list for all the meetings you have tomorrow. It is going to respond and react the exact same way. And we live with this adaptive system that was built for when, we were hunter and gatherers in the jungle many, many years ago. And now it's everything in the world has just progressed very quickly with social media and phones and access to the news and whatever it is, that we have not adapted to that happened way too quickly. And so we are still responding the exact same way. And that is where that nervous system dysregulation can really, really impact things like sleep, which then can impact your energy levels and your blood sugar and the foods you're eating for the rest of the day, which then
and your cravings,
everything.
Yeah. And this kind of archetype of patient that we're talking about, essentially, they're the patient that always says, Dr. Kelly, I can't meditate. I'm not going to sit and it's just the first thing that they say anytime I start to bring up mindfulness or breath work, or they'll even come in the office and they know me from yoga and they're like, just so you know, I know you see me at yoga, but I can't meditate. I'm like, okay, that's really good information for me.
Yeah.
I used to use something called the Safe and Sound protocol, which was just basically listening to help get their body into a more regulated state for those patients, because they needed it to be something they were doing still until we've done some of the deeper, psychological work or recognizing patterns or reasons why perfectionism or high achievement has, been linked to their identity or feeling safe or feeling loved. And I think as we tease out labs and we create this trusting relationship and safety within the container of our therapeutic relationship, then it's easier to unpack, some of those scary shadow sides, or, really acknowledging why we can't stop moving or we can't stop doing, and what that might look like if we did and what that might mean. So I think we see a lot of similar patients for sure.
Absolutely.
You mentioned breath work. So I am a yogi. I have a daily breath work and movement practice and meditation practice. And I'm like down the deep end of like sitting silently with self is my favorite thing. So I get that that's not going to jive for all patients, but maybe tell me a little bit about how you do introduce breath work or vagal tone, or, where beginners should start, why it's important as a concept. And I love that you pointed out that with breath work, there's something that they're listening to or following along with. It feels less scary than just being with self and thoughts. And especially if a patient doesn't feel safe in their body, or they're, have a really big stress response or trauma history. So tell me a little more about how you introduce breath work.
Yeah. I'll start with talking about my own personal experience and then dive into that, because I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
Again, in that first year of medical school, when things were really heightened for me and everything felt very unsafe, I would struggle to fall asleep at night. And again, because sleep is that time when you get to think about everything, right? Your body is finally stopping. There's nothing in front of you. So that's, of course, when all these thoughts are going to come fall on your lap. And so I was struggling with sleep and feeling safe, and I needed some sort of practice. So I started with meditation, which I had played around with prior to, and it was helpful. But then I came across breathwork, which was pretty new to me at the time. I think it's really starting to grow in popularity now, but that was 8 years ago, I think, and not many people were talking about it. So I found some apps and YouTube videos that would allow me to follow along. And that really just kind of was the stepping stone of me understanding, okay, this is great for my busy mind, because again, my mind, when I'm doing these active practices, really has no ability to think about anything. So I would do these practices for, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then I would end them and realize, oh, I didn't have a single, thought essentially this entire time. That's so weird. And I would start to notice how it actually impacted how I felt, my mood, my energy, my resilience. I was able to just feel better from a simple practice of breathing. And also, as a very anxious individual, I didn't even realize how much I was, for instance, holding my breath in anxious
Yeah, that's a
and so
big
I talk about
one.
this all the time with my patients, because when you're busy and you're high achieving, you probably don't even realize that you're doing it. So that sense of awareness is definitely the first step. But this was once like more, again, of a survival mechanism and adaptive response, holding your breath, to hear what's around you and get ready to go for the hunting and gathering or whatever it might be. Now we do it if, we have a really stressful meeting, or we're trying to meet a deadline, or there's something coming up, or life is just really stressful. Like, I physically notice myself just holding my breath.
I do the same thing.
How long have I been doing this for? And that can then create a stress response in your body, because it's adaptive, and can make you feel even more stressed, increase your heart rate, and basically tell your mind and body that it's unsafe. So it's going to respond that way. And so even noticing in those moments when I was doing something like that, or just feeling really anxious or really stressed in social situations, especially, breath is great, because nobody knows that you're doing it unless you're doing really intensive breath work. Mostly it's pretty easy to do without anybody even recognizing that you're doing it. And you can change your state, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being through breath anywhere. And so starting to notice how this impacted me and how I was able to implement this into my day to day. And then knowing that that was something that really interested me and how it actually changed my state. I would talk about it a little bit with patients, when I was in my final year at school and interested in it. And then as I got into practice, starting to realize, this is definitely more essential than I realized, especially for this population, who are going to probably tell you that they do not have time to meditate, or they're not going to meditate, or they've tried and they hated it. Okay, I get it. That's fair. Some people love it. A lot of people, especially again with that busy mind, really, really struggle. So I knew there had to be something else I had to give them. So in the last year, I actually got my breathwork certification, because I felt like it was really, really important for me to be able to have that physiological aspect, and then also be able to teach people how to do it. So it's still very new in my practice. My hope is that I will be able to, teach classes and have more offerings with it. But right now, what I really do is I bring the option up to my patients. I ask them if they've ever heard of it, what they've tried. Some people have, some people have never tried. And then I give them some simple practices just to try at home. I usually say before bed or when they wake up in the morning to get them started, because it might be really hard for them to start implementing this in the office or when they're at work, as ideal as that would be. I want them to create a sense of safety and familiarity around it first. So I always give them a few different, apps that they can use, or different YouTube videos that they can try, just to get started with some down regulating, specifically breath work, because there are so many different types of breath work. Everybody responds differently, but specifically, I really like breath work, especially like the 4-6-8 method. So inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 6, and then exhaling for 8. The exhale always being longer than the inhale. That's what's really going to stimulate our vagus nerve, which is then going to tell our rest and digest side of the nervous system that it's safe, it's okay. We're able to just come back down. So even just a few rounds, like 2 to 3 minutes, it does not have to be long, can make such a significant difference. And also always exhaling through the mouth, usually through like pursed lips, slowly breathing for that 8 seconds. That really can create that sense of safety in a very short period of time. And so I always start with just very short practices because I know these people do not have time or don't want to make time for that. And so that's fair. I say literally just 2 to 3 minutes. Can you do that and notice how you feel? Then we'll talk about how we can expand this practice further on when you start to, get familiar with it, understand
Because they have to feel it. Yeah,
Yes.
they have to feel it
Yes,
first.
exactly. You have to understand what it is. And until you do it, you really don't know. And you really can't know. There's no one who can explain it to you until you do it. And I think you have to, in some senses, go on your own journey with it to see what you enjoy. Again, everybody enjoys different methods. And there are just so many practices, styles, like music types that you can go with breath work. And so it really is just about experimentation and trying. So I give them a few different techniques to try and then see kind of where they land after our next visit. But I think those are kind of like the biggest foundations when it comes to just like getting into it and supporting the nervous system.
Yeah. In the first few episodes of this podcast, so back like 1 through 10, at the end, I was doing a lot of breath work. I probably should do it again in some of these later episodes. So I was just, walking patients or walking listeners through the way I would a patient. And
So smart.
I always explain to patients, I got this from Deb Dana's work. I don't know if you're familiar with Deb Dana and polyvagal theory, but she always says that story follows state. So as I'm working with a new patient and I'm having them track their nervous system state and just learn the language of what state is my nervous system in and what are the thoughts and the stories in my mind, it's a really good intervention to just start to understand that the story in your mind is going to follow the state of your nervous system. And then to figure out an intervention, which breathwork is the most simple and profound, even if not everyone wants to hear it, that is a really natural progression and, a positive way to kind of manipulate patients into doing that thing that maybe they didn't have interest in doing in their first visit. I do find that a lot of patients who do really well in that like fight or flight state or feel good in that state then also are using things like alcohol to numb or come down. And again, over time, when you haven't learned a regulating practice and you're maybe reaching for unhealthy choices to regulate, that will build up in your system and have other negative impacts, that breathwork is a great way to just kind of start acknowledging like, oh, I am feeling really tense or tight, or I'm bracing all the time and I am holding my breath. And I usually tell patients that when I was younger, I had really bad vagal syncope and I would pass out. And I learned over my years of breathwork and yoga practice, which has been 15 years now, that I was holding my breath a lot. And I'll still do it sometimes. Like I have my daily practice, but on a really busy or stressful day, I'll notice like, ooh, I'm holding my breath. And, luckily my breathwork practice is so strong that it's a tool I can really quickly implement. And I like to also explain to patients, it's kind of like having your brakes and your gas, right? Your fight or flight is like putting your foot on the gas of your nervous system, and your parasympathetic or a slow exhale is like putting your foot on the brakes and putting you into that parasympathetic. So on one hand, if you have healthy brakes, you're not going to go put your foot on the gas all day long anymore because you've got healthier brakes. And then on the other hand, if you've got healthy brakes that you've been practicing and working with, you're going to be able to pull it back in when you do get more dysregulated, or there's a high stress day or something's going on that you really need to have those breaks for. So I love that you do breath work with patients. It's one of my favorites.
It's the best.
Tell me a little more about, because a lot of our listeners are perimenopausal and menopausal. And I think as naturopaths, we're really primed for this demographic. Like I think just that age group. And like I said, women aren't always getting answers in conventional medicine. They kind of seek us out and find us. So what are some of the symptoms or stress patterns or maybe nervous system dysregulation patterns that you feel like are really unique to this population? And just tell me a little bit more about your experience with the perimenopausal transition for women.
Yeah. So I think first of all, most women, like I said earlier, don't realize how early this can start. because hormones are
Mhm.
slowly changing over time. We might be seeing some declines in progesterone and then maybe estrogen. And it's not necessarily so much so that it's noticeable, but things start to shift very, very slowly, right? I think
Yeah.
the common misconception is that, you hit menopause, it's just like hot flashes and, everything changes this one
Yeah.
day, essentially, and your cycle just goes away. When reality is, it's a very slow progression until the end when, things start to trickle. You eventually lose your cycle. Maybe it comes back for a month after you've had it for a way after it's been gone for, 8 months, whatever that might look like. Everybody's journey looks different. But I think we don't take into account all the changes and there's not enough education on all the changes that are happening so early, like even like a decade before you actually hit menopause, essentially, and then you become postmenopausal. And so I think the common theme that I have seen is, again, these late 30s, early 40s, maybe even mid 40s, women who are living their very busy lives again. They have maybe kids, they're at the peak of their career. And that's when the biggest thing that I see is I haven't changed anything, but all of a sudden, all these things have changed. My energy levels are completely dipping. I'm feeling very irritable, and the weight gain. Those are some of the most common things that I see come into my practice. Mostly they're not seeing changes to their cycle at this point. So again, they're not even thinking about maybe how that could relate to their hormones because we're not taught about any of this stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes they've been told they've sought care from someone else, and they were told, "Oh, you're not in perimenopause."
Yes.
I'm like, by definition, you are.
Yes. And I think this misconception that you can just like test labs and that can like diagnose you, even into menopause. Yes, we'll probably see a decline, of course, in those hormones, but there's no specific numbers. And we're not supposed to based off of the research, we're not basing your diagnosis just off of your labs. We're basing it off of your symptoms and your experiences and how you're feeling. And if you're not feeling well, then you deserve support. So I think that's a big thing because a lot of these women are pushed aside. Everything looks fine. Everything's normal, right? So they've probably, tried maybe certain diets. Maybe they've started to exercise. Again, that typically looks more like the cardiovascular exercise, the Pilates, the yoga, maybe some fad diets or caloric deficits, or just not eating meals or skipping meals in general. And they're not seeing changes. They're only seeing, more weight gain. They're feeling more frustrated. They've seen their, a specialist or their doctor, and conventional medicine is amazing, but definitely a time and a place. And I think right now, a lot of the conventional side is not thriving in the menopause and perimenopause areas specifically. And the research we're still learning so much. But I think having someone who can sit down with you for an hour plus to actually listen to your concerns and hear the patterns makes such a difference. It's really hard for someone to do that in 15 minutes, to be honest.
Totally.
And to give you all the information or to just tell you, look it up on the internet, because that's where things get extremely overwhelming. I hear so many people come into my office for so many different reasons, but I was on TikTok, I was on Instagram, this is what I learned. And they're learning from people who actually don't have the right information, essentially, or the education to back it.
And there's an order of operations. There's a therapeutic order that we're trained in as naturopaths. And one of the things that's why I have many episodes on this topic in the beginning of this podcast. I want women to start to understand that different way of thinking about their body. And, again, there's a time and a place maybe for hormones or an antibiotic or prescription medication. But if you haven't built the foundation, it's going to crumble regardless. And, a lot of the work I do or counseling around hormones, I do circle back to, the cortisol curve. And again, to things like pregnenolone and all of the ingredients that you need to make your sex hormones and how they're depleted by chronic stress. So even if we're go, go, go and we're thriving and we're achieving, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but if we're not looking back at the foundation that's all being built on, eventually it is going to crumble and our window of tolerance gets smaller and we have less GABA because we have less progesterone, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I don't recognize myself. And I'm sure you hear this all the time. I don't feel like myself anymore. And I almost you almost can't believe it how many times you hear that same phrase from different women in different phases and different experiences of life, but it's the same language. They're all saying, I
Mhm.
don't feel like myself anymore. And I end
Yeah.
up doing a lot of I do a lot of depth psychology work and counseling with patients too. And so, again, first, that kind of safe therapeutic relationship, then looking
Mhm.
at physical labs and ruling things out. And are you tired because of low ferritin? And then having these really honest conversations around like what have we been doing or not doing that is feeding this dysregulation or these kind of maladaptive stress response patterns that we can get more clear on. And I do think that menopause, perimenopause, and menopause is this beautiful transition and transformation period for a lot of women. And if we're not
Mhm.
telling women that, it can feel daunting and overwhelming and scary, and like all these bad things are going to happen. But we get really clear about what it is that we need. And if we're
Mhm.
able to have a guide like yourself to walk us through that process, it can really be life altering in such a positive way. I've seen so many women come out the other side different people in a better way, feeling better, not feeling better than themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important message.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive light to put it in because it is this thing that, women are taught essentially to fear for so long. And everyone's experience is so, so different when it comes to perimenopause and menopause and the
Mhm.
transition. And I think having, like you said, some form of support, someone who can take you through it so you don't have to figure it out on your own because who has the time? And also, you want to make sure you're getting valid information. You're not just, taking a
Yeah.
bunch of supplements that maybe actually aren't doing anything. And then you're spending a bunch of money and we're not actually understanding your unique needs, right? What do the foundations look like for you? Have we looked at your blood work in depth? What's deficient? What's missing? Are we, making sure that we're not just saying, oh, it is just perimenopause and not missing something like issues with thyroid or whatever it might be,
Mhm.
right? We want to make sure there's a comprehensive outlook on everything that's going on in your body. And that's going to look so different for every single person, even though it's the same thing, perimenopause and menopause, it is just very unique in every single individual. And so that's why it's important
Yeah.
to get unique support and care while you're going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could certainly say, like, in general, muscle is important, blood sugar is
Yeah.
important, having a mindfulness breathwork practice is important, but you're totally right that that will look different for everyone. And that's why I think labs are really crucial and listening to the patient's unique story and patterns. And again, kind of knowing the order of operations.
Absolutely.
I have like a kind of different question. So
Okay.
it's not one that I thought I would ask, but it just popped into my mind because we're getting to know each other and this is fun.
I
So,
like it.
how do you think about the vis, like vis medicatrix naturae and the healing force within us? And how do
Mhm.
you explain that, or do you talk about that with patients, or how do you think about it in your unique journey? And yeah, I
Mhm.
just am curious what your answer is to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I probably maybe don't bring it up enough. And it's something that I think I should. I think in different ways, maybe. And I think it depends on, I guess, who you're speaking to and how things
For
resonate
sure.
with you. Um,
Totally.
because I very much, I mean, of course, like as a naturopathic doctor, I think that's so, so important. It is really like within us. And I think, again, it's just about getting the right supports to help our bodies heal properly, right? So it's not necessarily like a failure if your body can't just do its thing on its own, right? I think we all
Yeah.
need that support, but I do think there's a huge aspect of mindset and what we believe to be true and what we believe about ourselves and our healing journey that also plays a huge part in how we are able to heal and what we
Yeah.
are able to accomplish. I do see that a lot of patients that see like a lot of success in their health are the ones that they're ready to take things on. They're ready to make changes and do the things and get the support and ask for help, not feel like they have to do it on their own. Because it is definitely a commitment and it's not an overnight success by any means, especially I think that's like one of the first things I tell patients when they see me or inquire about seeing me is that this will not be quick. This is going to take 3, 6, however many months to start to see changes. But the goal is for this to be lifelong. The goal is so
Hmm.
you don't have to come see me anymore, or maybe you
Yeah.
see me once a year, every 6 months, just for some maintenance, right? And so I think those pieces are definitely they kind of all tie together and are an important aspect of what we do.
Yeah. I think also when you're working with a patient and maybe you're again starting with I call it the physical plane of existence, right? And you're starting on the labs and the thyroid and the blood sugar
Mhm.
and the ferret and the energy, right? And then you start to approach the mindfulness and the mindset and the beliefs around healing and then the breath work. I really love back to the breath work. I obviously love to geek out on that. I love that moment where a patient can kind of feel and like drop into their body and almost start to have a relationship with that healing force within themselves. I do think that you have to get quiet essentially, like
Yes.
quiet and still. And again, this population of high achievers, it's probably not something that's been inherently comfortable for them or something
No.
that they've sought out before. So
Yes.
I think it's probably a great way to wrap up our conversation where if this resonated at all with you and you're curious, like maybe just finding a modality or a tool that helps you to get quiet with self. And that can be, I'm pointing at the water, no one can see that, but that could be sitting and looking at the water. It can be
Mhm.
walking outside with your feet barefoot in the grass. It could be, if you're in a winter place, it could be skiing outside. It doesn't matter to me what it is that you do when you're outside, but just being out with nature can really be a great introduction into like, what is that force, that power that we're referring to or tapping into? So yeah,
Absolutely. I
thank you
love
for
that.
answering that.
That's a good one. I like it.
I was curious what your question was. I have one more question. What do you think is like one of the most underrated kind of consistent daily habits? I could probably name a few, but what is something that maybe we haven't yet talked about in this conversation that you
Mm.
find really moves the needle for people and they're not quite aware when they first start working with you that it's a really easy thing to implement maybe and it's really underrated?
Mm. I mean, breathwork is like one of those things that always just sticks with me. I know we've spoken
Yeah.
about that a lot. So definitely
That's a
breathwork
good
for
answer.
sure. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's free, it's easy to access. You can do it from anywhere. And a lot of people are not tapping into that. And so I
Yeah.
think it's still very, very underrated and so easy to do and so easy to access. You don't even have to purchase like a subscription on an app. You can literally just look it up on YouTube and
Yeah.
find some great breathworks. But I just think it makes such a difference and it helps to bring that nervous system back to regulation and safety and teach it over time and create new neural pathways in your brain to
Yeah.
say, I'm safe in this. I am okay to regulate. I can slow down. Nothing dangerous is going to happen so that
Yeah.
you'll feel like you're losing yourself, like you're losing your edge or that you're burning out because you're able to give your body that space that it needs so that you can go about your day and do the rest of the things that you need to do.
Yeah, even just teaching like a physiological sigh, right? Like
Yes.
patients, your body knows how to do it. You're probably already doing it and you're not realizing. And so just being conscious about it and actively doing it can be so profound because you feel it immediately.
That was one
Yeah.
of the first breathwork techniques that I ever did. And that was taught to
Mhm.
me by a counselor that I was seeing when I was in that depth of anxiety and depression in my first year. She took me through the physiological sigh. I had never heard of it before. And
Mhm.
then I just do it automatically now. Like
Yeah.
I used to do it, had to think about it. I still do it to this day again, 8 years later. And I don't even think about it. Sometimes like my partner will ask, he'll be like, are you okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah,
Just
I'm
let me
just
know that
sighing.
it's fine.
I love that. I had a discovery call with a patient the other day and she was telling me how breath work changed her life and
Mhm.
I was giggling and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but what I said to her is that sometimes I look at humans around me and you can tell like people that maybe don't have a breath work, it's almost like they don't know how to use their body yet. They're like, is
Mm.
this thing on? How do I use
Yeah,
this?
so true.
And she appreciated that because she understood what I meant by it. But
Mhm.
it really is like learning how to tap into that healing, how to use your body, how to
Yeah.
regulate self. And I think it's just such an important tool. So as we wrap up, if there's anything else you want to share, please do so. And then please tell listeners where they can find you, what are some of the exciting things that you're doing in your practice. And I can't wait to chat more with you too. So it's so good to meet you and have this conversation. So yeah, where can we find you and what are you up to?
Yeah, first of all, love this conversation. I feel like we have a lot in common, so I love that. You can find me mostly on Instagram. It's at naturally Dr. Kirsten. You might have to put that in the show notes too, because I feel like
We
it's hard for
will.
people to spell. Um, that's where I'm mainly at. Hopefully one day I'll have a podcast again. I did once upon a time. But yeah, I think in the future, I definitely foresee right now, I'm mostly doing one-on-one naturopathic visits in Ontario. And Manitoba. I see patients virtually across both provinces. But my hope is to create more of a community for these high achieving women, whether that's a membership or group programs. I foresee adding additional support. One of the biggest things that I notice in practice is, I can be with my patients in the moment, but it's the in-between moments sometimes where more support is needed. So that is my hope, is to offer that through, again, group programs or memberships, hopefully in the near future. So definitely, if you're interested in that, follow along, send me a DM. I would love to hear if anyone is interested.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I'm sure that this conversation will resonate with a lot of people. And hopefully, they find you, follow along, and be on the lookout for offerings that you have in the future.
Perfect. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I've loved it.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Kirsten. I hope that you guys did as well. As always, if this episode resonated with you, please download it and subscribe so you don't miss any, and share it with a friend who you think might benefit. As always, your body knows how to heal. You just have to create the conditions for health. Have a great day.